Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on Butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. This episode specifically, we're going to ask the question, what is GarageBand? Well, if you've ever used GarageBand on the Macintosh, you know pretty much what this is. This is a version of this music creation software previously found on the Macintosh, now ported to the iPad and stripped down a little bit to fit onto the iPad screen and using the processor that's found inside the iPad. Now, GarageBand, like I said, is music creation software. It allows you to take loops, build them up into a bigger whole, create songs out of smaller bits. It allows you to record your own instruments, and it does allow you to play software instruments as well using keyboard, this time on the screen, or you can actually add one via USB to run with the iPad as well. Now, of course, even though this version of GarageBand is really stripped down from the version you'll find on your computer, it does actually have an extra capability that the other one doesn't have, and that's touch capability. Now, touch capability, of course, is integral to the iPad, and this version allows you to actually play keys using the touch screen. It allows you to move things around using your fingers. It allows you to expand. It allows you to pinch zoom to change the scaling of what you see on your screen, and other things like that that use touch functionality. To get started, you're going to have to download the program from the App Store. You can do that on the iPad or on your computer. You'll install it, and then it'll appear as an icon on your screen. And to open it up, you just tap it and it'll open up. When you launch the program for the first time, it'll take you into the instrument selection screen, so you'll choose one of the instruments that's available here. You can scroll side to side to get to different instruments and start with a different one. Start with the keyboard. Then it'll open up into a view where you can actually play the instrument on the screen. A lot of the controls you'll see from GarageBand on the Mac are gone here because it actually is very instrument-centric in this case. You can see play controls along the top, but the main focus here to start with is on the instruments. Now, once you've started and you've actually started recording something, you can flip into a mode that resembles the timeline that you would see on GarageBand back in the past, and we'll show you how to do that in an upcoming episode. Now, if you're familiar with other Apple applications on the iPad, like Pages, for example, GarageBand uses the same sort of format for managing your files. In this case, you'll hit My Songs, and it'll take you to a window that has all of your projects. All of the projects appear as big icons that give you a little bit of a window into what the project is. Swipe back and forth to choose the project you want, and then tap it to select it. If you want to create a new song, tap on the plus sign icon, and it'll give you the option to duplicate a song or add a new song. If you tap on New Song, it'll open up a new project that's completely empty. If you tap on Duplicate, it'll duplicate the project you currently had highlighted, so that you can make a remix of it from there. And because it's a multitasking program, it's worth noting that when you exit GarageBand by hitting the menu button, a little red bar will appear on the top of the screen reminding you that you're still in GarageBand and that it may be running and recording in the background. Another nice thing about GarageBand on the iPad is it has a really useful help function inside. To get information on anything on your screen, you tap the little question mark up in the top corner, and then a bunch of flags will appear on the screen listing a bunch of things on the screen that you can interact with. In some cases, you have the ability to tap through and get more information all written up with screenshots that explain things in greater detail than just a one-line flag about what that item is on the screen. That's a basic overview of GarageBand for the iPad. Don't forget to check out the other parts in this series. We'll actually take you through all of the steps in creating a song, and you can check out the show notes for this and the other parts in the series at Butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on Butterscotch.com. This series we're taking a look at GarageBand on the iPad, and in this episode we're going to take a look at basic song setup. Now, if you want to, you can just dive right in and start playing on GarageBand. You can just play without worrying about creating songs and recording. You can just play along with the keys or the guitar or whatever you want and just have a bit of fun. But you can record. We'll show you how to do that in a later episode. First, we're going to set up the song on this so that you can be ready to do that, and then we're going to take a look at some of the instruments in upcoming episodes so you understand how they work before we start the recording process. Now, when you're working with GarageBand, there's a few elements of the song you're going to want to set up ahead of time to make sure everything works the way you want. The first of these is the tempo of the song, and the other is the key of the song. These will affect how everything works in terms of smart instruments, how it works in terms of the speed, how the loops work, and all that sort of thing. So we'll set up a few of those things first. First, let's click the wrench in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and it'll give us a few options that we can adjust here. First of these is the metronome. This actually plays a little beat in the background, so you know when the song is recording where the beat is supposed to be, and you can play around with that. So either play to it or play against it, whatever works for you. But it does let you know where the beat is supposed to be in the project that you're working on. You can turn that off here if you really want to work freestyle, or you can adjust it to a different sound if the sound that comes with it, which is the wood block, annoys you. So you can set it to a hi-hat or a click, for example, if that actually makes you feel more comfortable. Next up, there's an option for a count-in. So when you're starting recording a song, it'll actually give you 4 beats before it actually starts officially recording. If you just press record and it just starts, obviously you can never hit the first beat exactly that way. So the count-in allows you to figure out where the first beat is going to be by giving you 1 full bar beforehand so you can hit the first beat right as it happens. Further down, we have the option to change the tempo of the song. Now, this is the speed, so if you want a faster song, you would move this up. If you want it to be slower, you would move this down, and then click the button to set the tempo. Once this is set, of course, all of the other elements of your song will click into place. So if you have a smart keyboard that you're using, for example, that's automatically playing for you, and we'll show you that later on, then it'll play it at the right speed to match your tempo. Now with the iPad's smaller screen real estate, one of the ways they've gotten around this and made it more manageable for you to use is by setting up sections on the song. And this is the little puzzle piece on the corner. So when you're using the Macintosh version of GarageBand, it's just free form and you can actually just keep going and going and going. You can actually set up small sections to repeat, but in general, you'll keep rolling through until you get through to the end. On this one, it sets you up in blocks of 8, 16, and you can adjust this as well. So it'll start in those little smaller sections and work in those, and then it'll loop you back to the beginning of that section. By default, the section is going to be 8 bars. Now this may be too short for you or too long for you for the first section you want to work on. And when you tap through, it'll give you the option of lengthening them or shortening them. It'll give you the option as well of adding extra sections. So if you know there's going to be several different sections, several different movements in your song, you can add as many as you want here. You have the ability to add a new one and then set the length of it, or you have the ability to duplicate one you already have. So if you have sections that are going to repeat, you can just duplicate it again. You also have the ability to set your sections as automatic. So if you do want to go freeform like you did in GarageBand and just keep recording until you actually hit a spot where you do want to stop, it'll keep track of that for you and then automatically stop when you're done. Once you have more than one section in place, you can toggle between them by hitting the puzzle piece and then moving to the one that you want by tapping on it. It'll actually change everything that's on your screen to that new section. You also have the ability to select all sections, so if you want to see the song as a whole, select that and it'll put everything on your screen at the same time. Another thing you may want to set up ahead of time, especially if you're not a stellar player in terms of your timing, is quantization. So quantization takes your input as you're entering things onto the keyboard on the screen and then sets it to the closest beat. So you hit the icon in the top right that looks like a set of mixboard sliders. And then you'll select a timing value. The higher the number, say 1/64, that means it'll play more of what you do closer to what you originally played. The lower that number, say 1/4, it'll actually slide your things around more so that they hit the beat more. Now you don't want to slide this up too high because then your playing might actually sound a little bit robotic. In fact, it might not capture all the notes that you want to play if you set it right up to 1/1. That'll only play one note every bar. Well, that's it for some basic setup. In the next episode, we're going to start talking about the software instruments we have on GarageBand for the iPad. We'll show you how to start playing them. For the show notes on this and the other parts in the series, you can go to butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand on the iPad. In this episode, we're going to talk about software instruments, in this case specifically, drums. Now drums are the backbeat of any song that you're going to do, so you'll want to make sure that you get a good drum sound and make sure that it's a good rhythm. Now there's two different ways you can do that inside GarageBand. One of them is by playing them yourself, and the other one is by using a smart instrument. Let's start with playing it yourself. You go to the Instruments menu and swipe over until you get to the option that says Drums. Click through it and it'll open up a drum kit. Now one really nice thing about all of the instruments you'll see inside GarageBand is that they're touch sensitive, using the accelerometer inside the iPad. The screen itself isn't touch sensitive, but by measuring how hard you're hitting it using the accelerometer, it can tell how hard you want to hit the instrument itself. So with drums, you have different effects depending on how hard you hit the drum. The sound you get is also affected by where you hit the drum on the screen. So if you tap in the center of the snare, for example, you get a snare sound. Tap on one side and you get a rim shot. Tap on one side of the hi-hat and you get a closed hat sound. Tap on the other side and you get an open hat sound. Now you do have more than one drum kit to choose from on GarageBand. So above the drum kit you'll actually see a little button that has the name of the kit you're playing. Tap on that and it'll reveal a whole pile of other kits that you can play. Select on one of the other kits and your drum kit will change to reflect what you've just chosen. Now in GarageBand you have two different types of kits you can play in here. You've got the original traditional kit with the drums laid out in front of you, and then you have more electronic style kits, say like a drum machine like you play in a hip hop song. If you use one of the electronic kits, you do have a few knobs up top typically that allow you to adjust the sound using little tweaks that you would use on a synthesizer or an electronic drum kit. If you tweak the knobs on one of these electronic kits, you can actually save it for later use and make it into a custom kit that you come back to. Now if you prefer not to do all of the hard work of entering all of the drums in by yourself, you can actually use what's called smart drums. Go back to the Instruments menu and slide over until you get to Smart Drums. You'll notice this one because it has a gear around the outside, and all the smart instruments on GarageBand have this. Now you notice here instead of one of the kits, you'll actually have a grid that has two different directions. You take items over from the right-hand side and drag them over into this grid. Now if you move this item higher in the grid, it'll be louder, and if you move it down lower, it'll be quieter. If you move it over to the left, it'll be more simple. If you move it over to the right, it'll be more complex. So you can take all of the different elements in your kit and place them on this grid and have different variations on what each of these things will sound like. Now you can actually take two items and place them on exactly the same spot. You'll only be able to move the top item after that, but you can put everything on exactly the same space if you do want to. If you don't want to go through all the hassle of figuring out where each of these things should go, you can actually hit the dice icon on the bottom left-hand corner and randomize. It'll create a version of a drum kit for you using random elements. If you don't like what it picked for you, you can hit the dice icon again and it'll pick a new version. You can keep doing this until you get one that you like. Again, you have the ability to change the type of kit you're using by clicking on the name of the kit over on the top left. Choose the kit you want, and then all of the elements that you have over on the right-hand side will change. If you just want to clear everything that's on the grid, you can hit the reset button over on the right, and it'll just clear everything out and you can start again. Then once you have a beat you like, you can hit the record button over at the top, and it'll start laying it into a track. We'll talk more about the basics of layering all of your instruments into a complete track later on in this series. You can see other parts in this series where we show you how the other instruments work and how to layer them all together. You can get the show notes for this and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand for the iPad, and now we're going to talk about keyboards. Now, keyboards are a bit more complicated than the drums, which we looked at in the previous episode. In this case, there's a couple different kinds. Again, you can play regular keyboards, so play them yourself, or you have the option to play smart keyboards, which will play for you. Now, to get to keyboards, you'll hit the instruments, and you'll swipe over until you get to keyboard. This will open up a regular style keyboard, which you can play yourself. The keys will appear at the bottom of the screen, and by default, it'll put you into grand piano mode. You have a couple different ways you can play the keyboard here. Now, while you can add a USB keyboard in and play using a regular keyboard, most people are going to actually play using the keys on the screen here. So you just press down on the keys with your fingers. As with other instruments on GarageBand, tapping them harder will give you slightly different sounds. You can control the range you see here by clicking on the arrows above the keyboard to the left. Using the adjustment here, you can actually go up much higher than regular pianos and much lower than regular pianos, so you can actually create a sound that isn't quite natural, but it does give you some extra options that can give you a more artistic effect. Now, just beside that, we have a slider for sustain. Now, sustain simulates the effect of the sustain pedal on a keyboard. When you press down on the pedal on a real keyboard, it opens up so that it actually rides out longer sounds. Changing the sustain slider on GarageBand has a similar effect, but is nowhere near as expressive as it would be on a regular keyboard. You can slide it back and forth while you're playing, but it can be a little bit awkward. Now, the next button above the keyboard determines what's going to happen when you slide your fingers back and forth over the keyboard. When it's in glissando mode, you have the ability to play like Jerry Lee Lewis. So you slide your fingers down the keys and it'll give you a sliding effect down all the various keys. If you switch this over to scroll mode, it'll actually move the keyboard back and forth instead. So you can still tap the keys to play them, but as soon as you swipe your finger, it actually slides you to a different section of the keyboard. Now, if you're not that comfortable with playing the keyboard and you want to adjust the keys that you see on your screen so you only hit notes that are going to sound comfortable together, you can actually adjust that using the scale button here. So tapping on that will bring up a few options that you can play. You can go into major mode, you can go into minor mode, you can go into pentatonic, which is more bluesy, and you have a few other options here. Tapping on one of these will change the keyboard layout so that you don't have the black keys anymore, and all you have are white keys, but those have been rejigged a little bit to different tones so that everything works together. It'll work slightly different depending on which version of this scale you choose. Now, it's worth playing around with the different modes here to see what kind of effects you have. Even if you can play the full keyboard, it's worth checking out a few of these just to see what kind of effects you can create. When you want to go back to the regular full-size keyboard, you can hit scale again and check off instead of one of the scale modes, and this will give you back the full keyboard. Now, the next button is for arpeggiation, which actually takes notes and plays them in sequence. By default, when you turn arpeggiation on and press a key, it'll play that note plus the note above it. And it'll keep going back and forth between the two until you release the key. So in the arpeggiation menu, you have the ability to adjust the number of octaves it'll run through, and in this case up to 4. Now, in the arpeggiation menu, you also have the ability to change how fast it'll run through all of the notes. So by changing it to one of the higher numbers, it'll run through really fast. Going to one of the lower numbers, it'll go through much slower. And the last option in the arpeggiation menu determines how the notes play in order. So if you play them in a specific order, it can play it in that order, or it can just run up and down, or straight up and straight down, depending on what your preference is for this. This is important because you don't just have to use one key when you're arpeggiating, you can actually hit multiple keys at the same time, and it'll run through all of those up through as many octaves as you select. Now, when you press them in a certain order, and you have it set to play back in the order that you press them in, then it'll go all around, as opposed to playing them all up and then all down. Now, once you have an arpeggiated sequence you like, you can actually slide the sustain slider over to the side, and it'll lock that in. Then once it's locked into place, you can hit other keys on the keyboard, and it'll transpose the arpeggiated sequence you have into the key that you've actually pressed. Now, lastly, you can adjust the layout of your keyboard. If you find the keyboard too small or too big, you can actually hit the keyboard icon over to the right and adjust that from here. So you have 3 different sizes of keyboard, and you also have the ability to play double-decker. So instead of playing just one keyboard, you can actually play with 2 hands on 2 different rows. Now you're not just locked into playing the piano on the keyboard here, you can play different types of keyboards as well. So we'll go back to single decker keyboard mode, and then you'll see at the top a little button that has the name of the keyboard you're playing. Tap on that and a few other keyboard options will come up. On this you'll have tabs for different types of keyboards. The default one will be more traditional types of keyboards that you'll see in acoustic instruments, but you also have the ability to play synthesized instruments as well on some of these other tabs. Now to change to a new keyboard, just tap on the keyboard you want to switch to and it'll open up. Now if you open up one of the synths, it'll give you a few more options such as pitch bend and modulation, like you'll find on an actual keyboard synthesizer. It'll also give you options for adjusting the sound of the keyboard using knobs over on the right-hand side. If you've tweaked the keyboard sound and you want to save that for later use, you can actually bring up the keyboards list again and click on Save, and then it'll put it into the Custom tab for later use. Some of these keyboards provide a bit of automation, like arpeggiation for example, but if you want to make it even more automated, you can actually switch over to Smart Keyboards. Tap the Instruments button and swipe over until you get to Smart Keyboards. Again, it has the gear icon around the outside. When you open this up, you'll see a grouping of vertical towers with the names of keys at the top. Swiping your finger through this will allow you to play the notes in that key. You can swipe through to play all of the notes, or you can tap to hit one or more notes at a time. You can play from different towers if you really want. You also have the ability to select your keyboard's autoplay, so if you don't want to swipe in time with the notes that you want to play, you can actually set it to do that automatically for you. Switching it into one of the different numbers there will give you different patterns. When you do this, it'll break up the towers into two sections, one playing the lower notes and one playing the higher notes. You can play two different types at the same time, or you can play both at the same key. Then once you're recording, you can use this to automatically play in time with the other instruments in your project. Again, we'll show you how to do that in greater detail in a later part of this series. Now with the keyboard, you don't have as many options here as you do with a regular keyboard. You tap on the keyboard over to the left, and it'll open up a small selection of different keyboards you can play in here. That's a look at keyboards and smart keyboards for GarageBand on the iPad. You can see the other instruments that you can play on the iPad on other parts in this series. You can check out the show notes for this part and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. In this part of the series, we're actually going to take a look at how GarageBand handles software stringed instruments like guitar and bass. Now, unlike with keyboards and drums, GarageBand only lets you play smart instruments for the guitar and the bass. While you can still pick them string by string if you really want to, it doesn't offer separate options for that here on the instrument screen. Swipe on over on the instrument screen until you get to the guitar strings inside a gear. Tap on that to open it up. Once you tap on that to open it up, it'll open up a screen similar to the smart keyboards with all of these chords listed in towers. Now, instead of keyboard keys, what this correlates to here is strings on the guitar. You can swipe your fingers through the tower to play the strings listed in the chord at the top of the tower. You can also tap to hit one string inside or hit more than one string at the same time. And if you prefer, you can actually tap the name of the chord right at the top of the tower and it'll play all strings simultaneously, which actually sounds a little bit unnatural, so you may want to avoid doing that if you can. Like with the smart keyboards, you also have the ability to autoplay here. Turn the autoplay knob over to one of the other numbers to get a different type of pattern. Then when you tap on one of the vertical towers, it will automatically start to play notes in that key. You can switch between the different keys by tapping on different towers. Now you can tap on the name of the guitar and switch to a different type of guitar, and then it'll change the way it autoplays depending on what type of guitar you've chosen. If you choose one of the electric guitars, you also have a few pedals to choose from to change the sound that you're getting. You can tap on the effects pedals to turn those effects on and off. Now if you really want to go freestyle here, you can change the option over at the far right hand side from chords to notes, and this will give you a more traditional guitar fretboard. Now instead of strumming to play here, you'll just tap in this section on the fret where you want to play the note, and then it'll automatically play it. You can actually press a note and bend it like you can on a real guitar. Again, it's not as expressive here as it would be on a real guitar, but you do have that option. As with the keyboards, you can simplify this a whole lot by pressing scale and then choosing one of the different scale types off to the side here. Now this may not be as intuitive here as playing it this way on the keyboard, but you do have the option to eliminate a bunch of notes that won't fit into that scale and play a little bit more stylistically here. Now Smart Bass works very much the same way as the guitar. On the instrument screen, you swipe on over to Smart Bass. It's the 4 strings inside a gear icon. Again, it'll open up with towers, but instead of 6 notes, you have 4 notes to choose from in these towers. You can play them one by one or together. Again, you can switch the type of bass by tapping on it and choosing a different type. And you can turn autoplay on and off and change the patterns by changing the numbers. And like under the guitar, you can change the switch from chords to notes and actually play the bass using the fretboard style playing that you play on a real bass. Again, you have the ability to restrict the notes that will appear here by tapping on scale and changing one of the scales, and then you can play a little bit more stylistically. Let's look at Smart Guitar and Smart Bass for GarageBand on the iPad. You can see how some of the other instruments work on the other parts in the series. You can check out the show notes for this and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. This series we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. This episode specifically, we're going to talk about guitars. So, as with the original version of GarageBand running on the Macintosh, you do have the ability to record other instruments into the iPad. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about guitars specifically. Now, you swipe over on the instruments list until you get to Guitar Amp, and then select it. Now, of course, before you can make the guitar work with the iPad, you have to have a way of inputting the sound into the iPad. There's a couple different ways you can do this. First, there's something called the iRig from IK Multimedia. This plugs into your iPad's headphone jack and makes use of the microphone input in that jack in order to accept guitar input. So the iRig itself has an extra headphone jack on here for piggybacking your headphones on here so you can hear what you're doing still, and it has a jack on the other side for plugging in your guitar. So if you already have a converter box for use with, say, GarageBand on your Macintosh, you may be able to use it here as well. I've got the M Audio Fast Track Pro here, which uses USB. I'm going to connect it up to a powered USB hub. Unfortunately, the USB power that comes out of the iPad itself doesn't have enough power to actually power up one of these boxes, so you'll need a powered USB plug. Then you'll need to connect the USB into the iPad. In this case, we're going to use the camera connection kit plug. You can get those for about $30, and you plug this into the bottom of the iPad, then plug USB in through there, and then you should be able to use your converter box through that. Now, not all of them will work, so you might want to double check before to see if there's evidence out there that it will work. In this case, the M Audio Fast Track Pro will work, so a number of the other M Audio ones probably will work as well. So now once you've tapped through and opened up Guitar Amp on the iPad, you'll see an amplifier cabinet on the screen here, and it has a number of knobs and switches on it that you can adjust. Now you probably noticed right off the bat that you can't hear what you're playing on the guitar, and that's because by default the monitor is turned off. To turn the monitor on, you'll tap the little icon that looks like a 1/4-inch plug. Here you can slide the monitor on, and then you can hear what you're playing. You also have the ability to adjust the noise gate here. So if you have a particularly noisy guitar, you can slide this up, and then you won't hear as much of the noise. You'll just hear when you start to play. If you want to hear more of the noise for a more raunchy feel, you can slide this down. You have a couple different ways that you can change the type of amp you're using here. First of all, you can just swipe from side to side to get to different amps within that category. If you want to change the type of category altogether, you can tap the name of the amplifier up top and then choose one of the other tabs. Again, you have the ability to tweak the settings and then save custom amplifiers in here. Each amplifier comes with effects pedals as well, and you have the ability to adjust and add to this. Tap the icon in the top right that looks like a little stomp box, and it'll open up the different pedals that you have currently associated with that amp. You can tap on one of the pedals to change it, or you can tap on one of the empty spaces here to add a new one. You can turn the effects on and off by pressing the switch at the bottom, or you can adjust the knobs at the top to change the sound. Once you're done playing with the pedals, you can tap on the icon that looks like the cabinet to go back to your amplifier. Now, before you're ready to start playing and recording, you may want to tune up as well, and there is an option for doing that here. Press on the tuning fork icon in the top left, and then start playing on the strings that you have. As you play each of the strings, the center of the iPad should list what note the iPad is actually hearing and tell you whether or not it is out of tune. Red bars to the left will tell you that it's undertuned. Red bars to the right will tell you that it's overtuned. So you adjust your tuning until the name of the note in the center turns blue. Once you've tuned up all your strings and you're ready to go, simply tap the tuning fork again and it'll bring you back to the amplifier. Then you can start playing your guitar with the amplifier and effects that you've chosen. You can press the record button at the top to start recording your guitar into the project. We'll talk more about how you can layer everything together, all the other instruments that you have, into a single recording project later on in this series. And check out the show notes for this part and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. This series we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. This episode we're going to talk about recording other types of instruments besides guitar. We've already shown off GarageBand's ability to use software instruments and to do input from things like the guitar, but you can also record other types of instruments as well, provided you have a microphone input. Now we're using the Yeti Pro from Blue Microphones. It's a USB microphone that also has XLR input on the bottom as well as the USB jack. That way you can use it both digitally and in old school analog recording sessions. It's a good choice for this type of application because it's fairly high quality, very configurable, and it actually works with the iPad itself. Now you need a couple of things to make this happen. Now the first thing you need is a powered USB hub of some sort, because the iPad USB connectivity isn't generating enough power to run a high power device like the Yeti Pro. You do need to have some power coming into the system from elsewhere. You also need to use Apple's camera connection kit and use the little dongle that has USB on the bottom. That will allow you to connect USB devices like the Yeti Pro into the system. Another benefit of the Yeti Pro is it also has a headphone jack on the bottom, so you can hear what's coming through the microphone in your headphones. You won't hear exactly what's coming through here, but if you can't connect your headphones directly to the iPad, at least you'll have a sense of what's going in. On GarageBand, you'll swipe through the instruments until you get to Audio Recorder, and then you'll select it. You'll open up a panel with a big VU meter so you can actually see what your input looks like and whether or not it's too loud. You won't actually be able to hear it through the headphone jack on here until you switch your monitor on. Just like with your electric guitar, you'll tap on the 1/4-inch plug here and switch your monitor on. Now on the bottom right-hand corner, you have a little graphic of the iPad and a note that says to hit the record button to start recording. We'll show you how to do that in greater detail, but you'll do this when you're ready to start recording your voice, or a mandolin, or an acoustic guitar, or something else where the sound travels through the air rather than down a chord. Once you do hit record, though, you will have access to a few other effects for your voice so that you don't sound exactly like yourself. So you can sound like you're on the telephone, you can sound like a chipmunk, you can sound like a robot, or even like a monster. Now another way you can record input from a microphone and then use it on GarageBand for the iPad is to use the sampler. Click on Instruments and then swipe over until you get to Sampler. Open it up, and now you'll be able to record sounds and then play them back on a keyboard at varying pitches and speeds. To record a new sample, make sure New Sample is selected on the right-hand side, and then hit the big Start button over on the left. Record the sound you want, and then press the big red button again to stop recording. Then a keyboard is going to appear underneath and allow you to play back your sound by pressing on the keys. Now it's going to do its best to match the sound that you just recorded to the note that it corresponds to on the keyboard. We'll show you how to adjust that in a second if it doesn't. After you record it, the waveform will appear in the top right-hand corner. You can trim the in and out points by hitting the trim button, then grabbing the handles on either side and then moving them in or out. You can hear how what you've recorded will sound as a loop by hitting the loop button, and how it'll sound in reverse by hitting the button that says REV. You probably want to adjust your trim while it's in looping mode so you can hear at best what it's going to sound like as a loop. Then when you hit a note on the keyboard, you'll hear both the sound that you've recorded plus a reference tone that says what that note actually is. You can adjust the tuning of the sound that you've recorded by hitting Coarse up top. This will adjust things very fast. Or if you want to fine tune, you can use the fine tune slider below. You can also adjust the attack and decay of your sound by hitting on the Shape button. This will determine how quickly the sound appears at the beginning and how quickly it fades out at the end. While doing any of these adjustments, if at any time you're not happy, you can actually hit the Revert button to undo what you've been working on and take you back to the previous step. When you're done adjusting your sound, you can actually hit the My Samples button, and this will allow you to save it. You'll see two columns. The left-hand column will be the samples that you're currently working on with the project you're working on now, and the right-hand column will be samples that are already in the library. To add one of the ones that you're working on right now, highlight it in the left-hand column and then tap Add to Library at the top. QWERTY keyboard will appear below. Enter the name that you want to give the sample, and then click Done, and then it'll appear on the list over to the right. Then you can select it at any time, even in another project, by tapping on My Samples and then selecting it from the list. Once you have a sample selected and loaded up into the keyboard below will function in much the same way as it does over in keyboard. You have the ability to use the sustain, you have the ability to arpeggiate the sound, and you have the ability to change your octaves over on the left-hand side. Again, you can change the keyboard layout in case you want bigger or smaller keys, or if you want to do a double-decker mode. That's a look at using a microphone to record into GarageBand for the iPad. Don't forget to check out the other parts in the series. We'll show you how to use some of the other instruments and how to create a song of your very own. And check out the show notes for this part and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. In this episode, we're going to talk about putting together your first project. Now, of course, it's fun to play instruments separately on GarageBand for the iPad, but it's even better when you actually can make them play together. And that's what we can do by recording multiple instruments at the same time on GarageBand. GarageBand is capable of recording up to 8 different instrument tracks, and that can include smart instruments, guitar input, microphone input, and loops. We'll talk more about loops in an upcoming episode as well. Now, when you're in any of the instruments inside GarageBand, getting started recording your project is easy. You just press the record button at the top. You'll start to hear the metronome that you've chosen, and then you'll hear a 1-bar lead-in so that you know what the time is and where you start entering in and start recording. Start playing along with the metronome, and it'll continue to record until it reaches the end of the section you've predefined. After it hits the end of that section, the record will turn off and it'll start playing back what you've already played. Now, if you don't like what you did, you can just press stop, hit the back button to get back to the beginning of the track, and then press record button again, and then it'll start again with the lead in and allow you to start playing again and re-record over what you did. Now, once you're satisfied with what you've recorded, you can move on to the next instrument simply by clicking the Instruments button at the top and selecting your next instrument. In the play controls up top, don't forget to click back to get to the beginning of the section, and then press record to start recording your new instrument into the timeline. Again, if you're not happy with what you did, press stop, back, and then record again, and then you can re-record that section. Now if you want, you can do this up to 8 times to have 8 different instruments playing on this track. Now unfortunately, in the mode that we have it here in Instruments, we don't have a very good overview of what's going on here, but you do have the ability to flip it back into the mode that you may be familiar with from GarageBand. Now after you recorded something, a new button will appear at the top of the screen, and that gives you the ability to choose between the instrument view and the timeline view. Click on the button that looks like a series of lines all grouped together, and it'll flip up and show you the timeline. You'll see all the tracks of the instruments you've recorded up until this point, and over to the left you'll see a little icon indicating the type of instrument that track is made up of. You can expand this section a bit by grabbing the divider line and pulling over to the right. Then it'll show you more information, including the full name of the instrument, individual track volume, and it'll give you buttons for soloing or muting individual tracks during playback. You can slide the divider back over to the left to hide that information again. Now the real power when you're in timeline mode is the ability to edit and adjust what you've done here. Now to adjust something in the timeline, just simply tap on that item in the timeline and it'll highlight darker green. You can then move it back and forth with your finger if it doesn't fill the whole timeline already. You can tap it again to bring up some other editing options, including cut, copy, delete, and paste if you've already cut or copied something. You can also hit loop, which will loop that item until the end of the section, or you can hit split if you want to actually split the section that you recorded into smaller chunks. Up at the top of the screen, you'll actually see a playhead, which will indicate where you are in the project. You can move this back and forth with your finger to the place where you want to be. If you want to split an item into several sections, you'll adjust that playhead to the beginning point, and then you'll tap it and then hit split. You'll see an icon with a pair of scissors on it. Just drag that down from the top of the item to the bottom, and that'll split it in that section. Then go to another position on the timeline, then hit split again, and then you can take that section out if you want. Using the split functionality like this, you can actually split things into smaller sections and make them into modules so you can drag them around to other parts of the project, rearrange them, that sort of thing. At any point during this process, if you realize something has gone wrong, you can actually start hitting the undo button at the top to start reversing what you've just done in terms of editing. Now if you haven't used all 8 tracks already, you can add a new track to your project by going down to the bottom left and tapping on the big plus sign. It'll take you to the list of instruments and it'll ask you to select one. Then when you select that instrument, it'll automatically take you into instrument view, and then you can start playing and recording using that instrument. Then when you're done, you can flip back into the timeline mode again. Now you can switch back and forth between instrument view and project view at any point by hitting those 2 icons. Now it's worth remembering here that you're recording in sections by default when you first start a project. Now you can go to the puzzle piece at the top and switch to a different section when you're ready to start recording into a new section, or you can select all sections if you just want to record throughout the entire thing that you have going on. Now the one big downside with GarageBand on the iPad is, unlike on the Macintosh, you can't actually individually edit notes. So if you've recorded a section and it's particularly good, except for one bum note, you can't go back and just fix that one note. You actually have to record the whole section again, unfortunately. That might change in upcoming versions of this. At this point though, it is a bit of a disappointment. The one nice thing though is it does give you the ability to record loops on this, and you can use those in timeline mode. We'll show you how to do that in an upcoming episode of this series. Check out other episodes of the series as well to see how to use the instruments and record them into the timeline here. And check out the show notes for this and the other parts of the series at butterscotch.com. Hi, I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're taking a look at GarageBand running on the iPad. This episode, we're going to talk about loops. Now, if you're familiar with GarageBand running on the Macintosh, you're probably familiar with the concept of loops. Loops are small snippets of music provided by Apple that you can actually build into a fuller song by dragging them onto the timeline. So think of it a little bit like Lego, where you take little bits of pieces and add them together until you have a whole. With loops, you have a whole pile of different things, say drum bits, bass bits, guitar bits, vocal bits, and then you can drag them onto the timeline as you need to. Now with GarageBand on the iPad, you have access to your loops after you've already put something into the timeline. So once you've recorded something on one of the other instruments and go back into the project mode, you'll see a little icon on the top right that looks like a little loop. Tap on that icon once and you'll see a list of instruments. Tap on one of the instruments and then you'll get a list of loops that use that instrument in them. You scroll down that list to look for something you're interested in, and then when you want to preview it, you can tap on it once and it'll actually start to play. Once you've found a loop that you like, you can actually drag it from that list straight into the timeline in a blank spot. Now when you drag an item from the loop list into your timeline, it will by default loop that item until the end of the section that you're working on. You can adjust this behavior a little bit. First of all, you can tap the loop in the timeline and then tap it again to get a list of options. If you hit trim, it'll give you the ability to shorten that loop if you want. When you shorten it here in the timeline like this, though, it'll shorten every instance of the loop after that first one, though, so it might actually take this out of time with the rest of your project, so you want to be careful how you apply this. Now, if you don't want that loop to appear throughout the entire project, you do have the ability to slice and dice this as well using the split functionality. Adjust your playhead to the section on the loop where you want it to start or stop, double tap it, and then choose split, drag the scissors down the loop, and then cut it. You can do this as many times as you want, and you can actually mix and match loops within the same track on your timeline. Now, you can also use loop on things that you've recorded yourself. So if you have a section in the timeline and you've split it and created smaller sections, you can actually take a little excerpt of that, double tap it in the timeline, and then choose loop. It'll actually loop it through the rest of the project then. And then you can adjust it the same way you would with one of the other loops. Now you can use looping on one of the other things in your timeline as well, whether it's something you've recorded using a software instrument or say something you've inputted using an acoustic guitar or your microphone. You can double tap the icon in the timeline, and then you have the ability to tap loop. If you have a smaller section, this works best typically. Then once you're done adjusting your loops and all of the other instruments in your timeline, you're ready to share your song with the world at large. We'll show you how to do that in an upcoming episode of this series. You can see the other episodes of the series as well as to how to use the instruments to get to this point. And you can also see the show notes for this and the other parts in the series at butterscotch.com. I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. In this series, we're talking about GarageBand running on the iPad. In this episode, we're going to talk about sharing the songs that you've created. Now, once you put all of your song together, you want to share it with the world at large, all of your friends, all of your family, everyone out there that needs to hear what you've been creating on your iPad. And there is a way to do that. To get started sharing, you'll tap on My Songs button in the top left, and it'll bring up a list of the songs you've been working on. But instead of tapping it to open, underneath you'll click on the Share button in the lower left. Now when you tap on this, it'll give you the option to send to iTunes either as an AAC file, which is an audio file, or as a GarageBand file, which is the actual project file. Tap on the option you want to save. Then the next time you plug your iPad into your computer and fire up iTunes, you can actually retrieve your songs from there. So inside the iTunes application on your computer, you'll click on the iPad in the left-hand iTunes bar. Then in the right-hand pane, choose the Apps tab, and then scroll down to the bottom. Click on GarageBand in the left-hand column. All the items you've chosen to share will appear on the right-hand pane then. Click on the items you want to save to your computer, and then click the Save To button below. Choose the save location, and then click Save, and then the files will be pulled over from the iPad. Now, if you've chosen to share your GarageBand project over to the Mac, unfortunately you can't open it on your Mac just yet. When you try to, it'll say that you need a newer version of this. Now, almost certainly this will change down the road as a new version of GarageBand is released, or when the current version is updated to accept these files. But for the time being, you can't do that. Now, what you can do is you can share songs from iPad to iPad. So if you have a project that you've done on one iPad and want to move it to another iPad, or you want to send this project over to a friend for them to continue to work on, or vice versa, you can do that. So you take the GarageBand file, upload it to your computer, then take that file over to someone else's computer. They would open up their copy of iTunes and then add that GarageBand file into their Apps tab. Then when they open up their iPad, they can actually move it over to their iPad and then work on it from there. Now when you're sharing songs from your iPad, you have another way of sharing them as well, and that's by clicking on the Share icon and choosing Email. Now when you do that, it'll open up an email message right within GarageBand. Now when the email message opens up, it'll have a lot of the text already filled out telling you what's going on here. But if you want to customize it with a personalized message, you can do that here too. So then enter the email address you want to send this song to, and then click Send, and provided you have internet coverage, it'll actually send it at that point. Well, that's it on sharing your songs on GarageBand for the iPad. Don't forget to check out the other parts in this series where we show you how to use the instruments inside GarageBand and how to create a project of your very own. You can see the show notes for this and the other parts of the series as well at butterscotch.com. I'm Sean Carruthers, and welcome to How Do I on butterscotch.com. Series we're taking a look at GarageBand for the iPad. In this episode specifically, we're going to talk about using an external keyboard to play on your iPad. So we've already talked in the earlier parts of the series about how you can connect other things up via USB. And MIDI controllers like this USB keyboard from M-Audio are one of those things that you can add to the system. You're going to need a couple things to make this happen though. First of all, you're going to need Apple's camera connection kit, and there's a USB dongle inside that kit, theoretically for connecting your camera straight through into the iPad, but it does work with a few other things as well, including this MIDI trigger. Next, you're going to need a powered USB hub of some sort because the USB coming off of the iPad itself isn't enough to drive the power of most of the devices that you'll want to attach to it, including this trigger. Lastly, of course, you'll need the USB keyboard in order to control what you're playing on the iPad. In this case, we have the KeyStation 49E from M-Audio. So you want to connect all these up in the right way. So you'll take the KeyStation, you'll plug the USB of that into the USB hub. Then you'll take the USB hub and plug it into the camera connector kit. And then you'll take the camera connector kit, plugged into the USB, and plug that into the bottom of your iPad. Then when you hit the keys on your keyboard, they'll play on your iPad as well, and you can record using this keyboard instead of the software keyboard found on that. This can be a little bit less limiting, obviously, because you're not scrunching your fingers into a little keyboard like this on the iPad screen. You can actually play naturally with a full-size keyboard like you have on one of these keyboard devices. Then, of course, you have access to some of the other controls found on the keyboard, like the volume control, like so, or the pitch band, and even the modulation.
if that does anything on the particular preset that you're using on the iPad. So you can control a lot of different things from the keyboard itself, which makes it a much more natural performing environment for a lot of people. If you're used to playing on a keyboard like this already, it means you don't have to sacrifice when you're starting to do a project on the iPad inside GarageBand. That's a look at using a USB keyboard on the GarageBand for the iPad. Don't forget to check out the other parts in the series where we show you how to use the software instruments using the on-screen keyboards. And don't forget to check out the show notes for this and the other parts of the series at butterscotch.com.